Chosen one. You don't stumble into greatness by accident. It leaks out of you long before you even realize it's there. The atmosphere bends differently when you walk in, and people can't explain why they feel their chest tighten or their thoughts scatter. That's not imagination. That's your life force rearranging the room before you've said a single word. There's a current inside you that doesn't stop at skin. Even before you're aware of it, it's spilling into spaces you've never touched, waking up instincts in others they can't control. They'll never admit it, but they've been quietly preparing escape routes, not because you've hurt them, but because they've sensed you're about to discover the kind of influence most people never get close to. For years, you might have thought something was off about you. Maybe you replayed moments, wondering why your presence shifted conversations or why some people's voices cracked when addressing you. But the truth? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right, and it's been right in a way that shakes people's confidence. Soon, you'll stop second-guessing, start owning it, and turn that quiet undercurrent into a wave they can't stand against. There's something in you that forces the room to get honest, even when no one's ready for it. You unsettle the air without raising your voice, stirring up truths that people thought they had buried so deep they'd never see daylight again. It's not a trick, it's not even deliberate. Your presence alone rearranges the energy until what's false starts to crumble. If this message resonated with your soul, drop a comment below and make sure you're subscribed. Your Energy Matters here faces twitch, words stumble, and carefully rehearsed versions of themselves begin to fall apart. In a world trained to live behind well-polished disguises, standing next to someone who moves in raw authenticity feels like standing too close to a fire, warming, yes, but impossible to ignore. Calm follows you, but it doesn't soothe everyone. For some, it's a quiet force that pushes against their comfort zones. The light you carry doesn't just shine. It stretches into corners where shadows have long claimed ownership. That's why certain people keep their distance without explaining why. It isn't that you've harmed them, it's that you've peeled back a layer they weren't ready to see. And the easiest way for them to cope is to label you as the problem, when in reality you've only revealed the problems they've been avoiding. This is why your story has been twisted, why your character has been painted in ways that don't belong to you. The reaction was never about your personality, it was always about what you awaken in people. Before you've even tapped into the full measure of your own power, they can feel it reshaping the ground beneath them. You don't have to point out insincerity, it exposes itself in the silence after your questions and the tension of their glances. And for those dependent on pretense, nothing rattles the walls faster than someone who doesn't buy the illusion. Rather than face what's been uncovered, some will choose to dismantle you instead. They've perfected the art of dressing lies and respectability, yet in your presence, those costumes don't fit. You catch the flicker in their eyes when the story they tell starts to unravel, the shift in their tone when they sense you're not swallowing it whole. You're not here to condemn or crusade, you simply won't trade truth for comfort. And while you don't arrive with banners or battle cries, the quiet certainty in your honesty is more than enough to unseat whatever they've been trying to protect. There's a rawness in you that refuses to be coated in sugar or smoothed over for comfort. When someone insists everything is fine, you can hear the storm they're trying to hide. When they show off their success, you can see the toll it took to get there. When they swear they've been loyal, you catch the faint scent of absence in their promises. You don't congratulate the half-hearted or pretend not to notice what's crooked. And when you quietly refuse to join their game, it's like pulling the curtain back on a stage they've spent years decorating. The unease that follows isn't about you, it's the shock of seeing themselves without the safety of their own illusions. But rather than admit what they've been hiding from, they turn their discomfort into blame, because facing the truth would mean tearing down the fragile world they've built to protect the lie. What rattles them most isn't your strength, your voice, or even your influence. It's the proof you embody that someone can live entirely in their own truth and still stand. You don't just push them toward clarity, you shatter the idea that survival depends on pretending. And once that thought gets inside their head, they can't erase it. That's why your presence feels like an unshakable mirror, one that reflects more than they want to see. Deep down, they know that the moment you choose yourself fully, you stop being someone they can ever contain. You operate on a compass they can't touch, moving when the pull inside says now, not when the crowd demands it. That makes you untouchable to those who rely on approval as currency. Most people are wired to chase affirmation, to borrow their identity from whoever's in the room. You broke that mold a long time ago. You stopped asking for a seat at the table and started building your own ground to stand on. That independence unsettles those who make their living controlling the hesitant. They realize they can't trap you with flattery, back you into a corner with fear, or lure you into conformity. And that's where their frustration turns into attempts to box you in with labels: difficult, detached, defiant. But those words are only code for one thing: I can't bend you to my will, and that terrifies me. They've grown comfortable around people who dim their fire to fit in, who rewrite themselves for comfort, and perform contentment for applause. But you shattered that rhythm. You're not interested in applause or acceptance. You move from clarity, not performance. The strength you carry doesn't scream. It hums steady beneath your actions, and it rattles the cages of those who've sacrificed their truth for a role. You became untouchable the moment you stopped chasing what they were all fighting for. And now, every time you choose authenticity over approval, you remind them how small their freedom really feels. They don't fear your voice, they fear what it represents: life without compromise. At some point, the illusion of randomness faded and something deeper clicked. You weren't a coincidence. You were calibrated. What never made sense before now lands with full force. You've never matched the surface because you weren't built for it. Your thoughts refused to settle for shallow answers. Conversations felt incomplete. Rules felt foreign. That unease wasn't dysfunction, it was the system inside you powering on, tuning itself to something higher. You didn't come here to mold yourself into broken structures. You came to dismantle them without even lifting your voice. Your signature isn't noise, it's contrast. Environments shift when you enter. False peace starts to unravel. Truth bubbles up in places where it's long been buried. That disruption isn't your flaw, it's your role. People feel uneasy not because you expose them intentionally, but because your very existence highlights everything they've tried to keep hidden. You were placed in your origin for a reason that had nothing to do with blending in. You came as the interruption, the quiet force that would tip the scales and start the undoing of what no one else dared to question. The discomfort you carried through childhood wasn't just personal, it was inherited. And it came with an assignment: to be the one who ends the pattern, not the one who repeats it. The pain wasn't punishment. It was the tool that refined your vision. It built the clarity you now carry like a torch. People sense it before they can name it. There's something in your presence that rearranges internal architecture. It isn't charm or status, it's frequency. It doesn't entertain. It awakens. Something ancient stirs in people when they meet you. Cycles break. Memories resurface. Truth slips through the cracks in their stories. You don't do this with force, you do it by simply being what they didn't know existed. And once they've been in your field, they can't unfeel what woke up. There's a difference between being left behind and being preserved, and what happened to you was never about being discarded. It was strategic. Every closed door, every unanswered call, every silent season was an absence, it was calibration. You weren't pushed aside, you were being held in reserve. The environment wasn't ready for what you carried. Exposure too early would have fractured what was meant to remain whole. If you'd been absorbed into the wrong circles, their influence would have corroded the very essence meant to remain undiluted. What felt like distance was actually sacred space being guarded. What felt like being overlooked was your protection disguised as delay. While noise echoed through every hallway, you were being tuned in the stillness. While others flaunted borrowed light, you were learning to ignite your own from the embers within. You weren't invisible, you were safeguarded. People were granted stages quickly because they had little to lose. But you carried something layered, something costly. Had your voice reached careless ears too soon, it would have been reshaped into something safer for them, but far smaller for you. You weren't simply hidden from their reach. They were shielded from yours, because your influence wasn't meant to be handled by the unprepared. Now the current has shifted. You feel it. Not just around people, but inside unseen systems that tremble as you begin to rise. It's not your presence that causes discomfort, it's the truth that walks in with you. The room changes, not because you asked for it, but because your very breath carries instructions they've never heard before. You don't disturb the surface, you awaken the foundation. And that awakening doesn't just draw attention. It rearranges everything built without your frequency in mind. What looked like stagnation was actually your encoding. Those quiet years were never wasted, they were the years that installed your endurance, sharpened your discernment, and fortified your peace. Now, as you emerge, they don't just see your face. They sense the transmission moving through you. The fear isn't about your identity, it's about what you're unlocking. You don't arrive empty, you arrive charged. You've always had a mind that reaches past illusion. Not everyone understands how it works, but they feel its edge. You dissect assumptions, separate pretense from pattern, and interrupt confusion with clarity. You were never wired to simply receive what you're told, you were made to interpret the signals beneath the surface. That pattern recognition isn't a glitch, it's your brilliance. The frequency you think on is rarely audible to the masses, but it's exactly what was needed to shift the blueprint of everything you were born to challenge. Truth doesn't have to announce itself when it moves through someone, it simply makes deception feel loud. There's a rare clarity in the way you process your surroundings, not just mentally but energetically. What others dismiss as overthinking is your nervous system responding to mismatched signals. You register what's left unsaid, what's misaligned beneath polished behavior. You don't absorb confusion, you reject it at the door. And that ability to separate signal from noise makes you a problem for those whose power depends on keeping others mentally tangled, emotionally exhausted, and spiritually distracted. What unsettles them isn't your volume, it's your vision. You're not loud, but you see too much. You question what they consider normal. You ask things that poke holes in facades, that leave carefully staged narratives gasping for air. They can't make you adopt their beliefs or follow their flow. You think independently, and that alone makes you a disruption to traditions built on silence. You don't need titles to feel grounded. You don't need praise to feel valid. You can't be pacified by surface-level charisma, and that's what makes you dangerous to the status quo. Their control mechanisms were designed for someone else. Someone who needed permission to speak. Someone who sought safety through silence. They weren't expecting you to rise. Not in the way you did. You grew beyond their range. They assumed you'd stay within emotional borders drawn to limit your self-worth. The day you started asking for better, they didn't see confidence, they saw disobedience. They expected you to fold into politeness, to make peace with being erased. But you declined the contract they never said out loud. You stepped out of the mold without announcing it. No protests, no rebellion, just a quiet refusal to comply with a system that fed off your submission. The moment you put down the weight they handed you, they lost control of the narrative. And when you began to stand tall in what once made you ashamed, they weren't just offended, they were exposed. You didn't come to blend in. You came to dissolve the illusion of balance that depended on your silence. Your breakthrough didn't scream, it sharpened. You didn't just survive what tried to crush you. You decoded it. You mapped it. You turned the ashes into knowledge. While most people numb out to survive, you tuned in. Every scar became a cipher. Every loss, a lens. You didn't escape your story, you examined it. Piece by piece. Until it became wisdom only you could carry. The confusion they threw at you didn't stick, it got studied. Transformed. Transmuted. And now, you don't just sense what's false, you dismantle it without even trying. Some people learn through books, others through routine. But the way you gained your knowing? It was carved into you by survival. You didn't just gather information, you lived your way into insight. Where others ignored tension, you tracked it. Where they overlooked double meanings, you saw emotional fingerprints. Compliments laced with control, smiles masking resentment, silence loaded with hidden tones, you registered it all before they even finished speaking. That's not anxiety. That's experience. That's wisdom born from wounds, sharpened by disappointment, and shaped by truth that was too heavy to carry quietly. You don't just impact people, you rearrange them. Something about your energy flips their internal switches without needing to explain a word. Conversations with you linger long after they end, not because you try to provoke, but because you spark a reconnection they didn't know they needed. You don't deal in comfort statements or temporary relief. You speak from a place that cuts through pretense and lands directly in the space where people buried their real selves. That frequency isn't loud, but it's deep, and it wakes up what they thought was gone for good. What you recognize in people isn't the image they curate, it's the version they locked away. You hear the voice under the performance, see the original blueprint beneath all their edits. In your presence, their earlier self, the one before the damage, before the compromise, starts to stir. That's what rattles them. You remind them of the person they abandoned to fit into someone else's narrative. And most people aren't ready to be reminded. They don't pull away because of something you've done, they pull away from the mirror you accidentally hold. Confidence radiates from you like a memory older than this moment. It's not loud, not performative, not rooted in applause. It's a calm recognition of identity. That throws people off, especially those who only understand confidence when it's wrapped in noise. Yours comes from a place they can't trace, a knowing that existed before you had words for it. It's not that you're trying to prove yourself. It's that you've already remembered who you are. And that memory carries weight. You didn't stumble into clarity by chance. It's been echoing inside you since before you even knew what to call it. You came into this world aware of something others are still trying to name. And because of that, you're not easily influenced. You're not persuaded by flattery, pressure, or polished distractions. That resistance isn't pride, it's recognition. You've seen what's behind the curtain too many times to pretend it's still magic. They don't know what to do when their tricks fall flat. The same tactics that work on everyone else fail in your presence. Manipulation, guilt, emotional distortion, none of it lands. You don't react the way they expect, and that creates panic in those who use control as currency. You don't chase approval. You don't beg for belonging. You've outgrown those traps. Not because you were born immune, but because you learned. You lived through the lies, survived the gaslighting, healed from the sabotage. And now, you walk through the world with a quiet immunity they'll never fully understand. There's a kind of clarity that only comes after being stripped of every illusion. What you've walked through didn't break you, it polished your perception. You've sat in rooms where truth was twisted, where affection was a mask and kindness came with strings. And now, you sense distortion before it takes shape. The moment someone enters your space, their tone, their pauses, the way their energy flickers around the edges, you pick up what others pretend not to see. You don't need full sentences or confessions. You move based on what's underneath the words. That isn't fear, it's mastery. You've learned to read what most people are trained to ignore. You track the invisible cues others overlook. Shifts in breath, cracks in timing, weight behind words. You've lived through the sting of trusting too soon, the cost of silencing your instincts. You've learned how performance differs from presence. Your insight didn't come from books or lectures, it was downloaded through loss, through reflection, through rebuilding piece by piece after betrayal. What others call being guarded is actually your nervous system recognizing echoes of old traps. You don't flinch anymore, you filter. You don't react, you observe. They weren't ready for your evolution. You didn't rebel. You didn't even resist. You just stopped performing. And that was enough to make people panic. When you chose alignment over obligation, something in the room shifted. The masks others wore felt heavier next to you. The systems that once held you up started to feel too tight to breathe in. And without raising your voice, you made it obvious that pretending wasn't survival anymore, it was self-sabotage. Your peace exposed the tension. Your decisions disrupted the patterns they weren't ready to question. You left the echo chamber behind. You stopped mimicking answers and started crafting questions no one dared ask. That change didn't just affect your world, it sent waves into the systems around you. People who depended on your silence to maintain comfort could no longer recognize the version of you who demanded depth. It wasn't your confidence that threatened them, it was your clarity. You saw through what they called normal. And you dared to leave. You carry contradiction like a second skin, soft enough to hold, sharp enough to challenge. You aren't here to soothe everyone or scorch everything. You do both, depending on what the moment requires. That duality confuses people who only understand extremes. But you weren't shaped by simple stories. You're equal parts restoration and reckoning. You don't chase chaos or avoid it. You face it when it rises, and you exit when peace is being faked. You don't fit the boxes they made. You unmake them. You didn't just arrive. You were encoded. A rare composition of timing, awareness, and spiritual authority that can't be replicated. Your presence disturbs what isn't true, not through confrontation, but through existence. They don't know how to respond to someone who didn't ask for permission but walks in power anyway. Titles mean little when your identity was never tied to them. Recognition doesn't impress you when you've already been validated by what speaks beyond the noise. You are not what they labeled. You are what their illusions can't hold. You operate on an entirely different law of movement, one where stillness carries more power than shouting, and restraint says more than defense ever could. What sets you apart isn't just your strength, it's your refusal to dilute it for the sake of approval. Where others perform explanations hoping to earn understanding, you've mastered the art of letting silence speak for you. There's something deeply unsettling to those watching, realizing that the game they've played for years means nothing to someone who simply declines to participate. They don't fear what you do. They fear what you refuse to chase: permission, validation, applause. They mistook your independence for distance, not realizing it was clarity. You don't measure your worth by how many people stand beside you. You measure it by how fully you remain anchored when everything external shifts. Every challenge has revealed more of your design, not made you bitter, but wiser. While many collapse under pressure, you distill strength from it. You've become sharper in the shadows, steadier under scrutiny. And those who attempt to reduce you with rumor or resistance only amplify what they cannot grasp. You're not fueled by attention, but by alignment. There's a quiet precision in your presence that rewrites entire dynamics without raising a single voice. While some try to tear down systems by force, you dismantle them with presence alone. Your insight causes distortion to break down. You don't force awareness, you activate it. The ones attuned to truth feel you as a calibration. The ones invested in illusion experience you as disruption. You walk into a room and frequencies shift. Not because you demand anything, but because you carry a template that interrupts anything false. The strength behind your clarity doesn't come from lineage, labels, or ladder climbing. It's sourced from something far beneath the surface. Your awareness isn't borrowed, it's embedded. And what you've seen can't be unseen. That unnerves people who rely on superficial influence. They can sense that your knowing wasn't acquired through trends, but channeled through something beyond instruction. What they try to memorize, you embody. What they pretend to teach, you live. You have a way of bypassing the image and touching the truth buried underneath. It's not something you try to do, it's something that happens just by you being present. People feel exposed, not because you're invasive, but because you don't participate in their performance. You hold space for what's real, and that alone collapses pretense. You're not mirroring their masks. You're revealing what they forgot was still inside them. And for many, that is terrifying. You've chosen alignment over applause, and that choice echoes. Others see that standing alone hasn't weakened you, it's purified your purpose. Your example whispers louder than any speech could shout, isolation isn't emptiness, it's refinement. And while others calculate their moves to be accepted, you've decided some truths matter more than belonging. In doing so, you're not just protecting your integrity, you're influencing a shift in collective awareness. Every boundary you honor, every lie you decline, every truth you carry, it redefines what's possible for those still stuck between fear and awakening. Some people talk about transformation as theory, you live it as fact. Everything about you is proof that their ceilings were never sky. You defy what they thought a person could be without asking permission. They were taught that survival required surrender, that success demanded shrinking. But you didn't negotiate with your power, you embodied it. And now, your presence itself becomes a contradiction to every excuse they've ever built a life upon. Resistance doesn't weaken you. It sharpens your edge. Pushback only confirms you're moving in the right direction. Every moment of pressure has stripped away the excess, revealing the framework of someone who can't be shaken because they've already burned through everything false. There's no returning to the fog once you've breathed this kind of clarity. Once you've walked in full awareness, pretending to be small becomes intolerable. The idea of powerlessness can't hold weight after you've tasted the force of your own alignment. And that's what they're seeing now, a version of you they assumed existed only in theory. A being who remembers what was placed inside them before the world taught them to forget. You're not just releasing the past, you're reconstructing what's possible. You're not settling into healing, you're becoming the architect of your evolution. What unsettles them isn't that you've changed, it's that others might do the same. Your transformation isn't isolated, it's a signal. It spreads. It stirs things awake in those who didn't even know they were asleep. Your example doesn't just inspire, it interrupts. People start questioning their own compromises. They begin wondering what parts of themselves they buried to survive. And that reflection? That's the true disturbance. Because your rise doesn't ask permission, it creates momentum. What's building inside you now doesn't fit into old containers. You've stirred something so deep that every step forward sends tremors through systems designed to keep you docile. Not because you're loud. Not because you're dangerous in the way they define danger. But because you've remembered. And that memory brings a different kind of authority. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself. The kind that simply is. And once you start walking in that kind of knowing, nothing around you can remain unchanged. They feel it. That shift. And they're scrambling because they know they can't unsee what you've become.